The taxpayer who receives money, assets, or equities in Italy, real estate rights, or anything like that as inheritance must estimate and pay the inheritance tax. Very simple. Let's be honest, receiving assets as an inheritance is only a pleasure, but it's necessary to consider some cases, fortunate or not, I'll let you pick, in which the law also provides some tax burden. And of course, anyone here in Italy receiving this good news or bad news, once again, I'll let you pick, has to manage everything with Italian Revenue Agency. The Revenue Agency establishes the amount due on a tax basis, and they're always there to make sure that there are no errors and mistakes in the tax provided. From a very practice point of view, let's talk about an inheritance that will be will or without the will. Certain individuals, such as the spouse, descendants, and ascendants, in the absence of descendants, are in any case entitled to a share of the package of the inheritance, like a fixed percentage guaranteed by the law. This right to the legitimate share constitutes a limit to the will autonomy and falls within the scope of the so-called necessary successions. Successions, by cause of that, impose a series of obligations also from a, as I said, fiscal point of view. In particular, within 1 year, so within 12 months of opening the will, the successions, if you want, those called to succeed must file to the Italian Revenue Agency the inheritance declaration, as known as dichiarazione di successione, which basically allows the tax office to calculate and estimate the taxes on inheritance package. These declarations also includes, in fact, the personal details of the people involved in the process and the description, very detailed, of the asset subject to the successions, and is very functional for the payment of inheritance tax. There is a tax obligations that has an incredible importance right now because it constitutes an essential condition for you to become the owner of those assets in order to manage that money, those assets in the long run after received everything by death. As regards taxation purely, the tax legislation establishes that on assets included in this inheritance tax return, the specific inheritance tax is due, taking into account their value and the degree of kinship between the deceased and the beneficiaries. The inheritance tax is therefore owed by heirs in a proportional manner in percentages, in application, of course, to the degree of kinship and affinity to heirs and legatee. So, how much we're talking about? 4% for the spouse or relatives in a direct line, like parents and children, to be estimated on the value exceeding, for each year, 1 million euros. Then 6% for brothers and sisters, to be calculated for the value exceeding 100,000 euros for each year. 6% to be calculated for the total value due for other relatives up to the fourth degree, relatives in direct line, as well as relatives in collateral line up to the third degree. And then 8% to be estimated for the total value for all other individuals and cases. If the beneficiary of the transfer is a person with a disability, the tax applied to the portion of value of share that exceeds 1,500,000 euros. Another important thing to take into account when calculating inheritance taxes concerns the calculation of the taxes base of the estate inheritance tax. The overall net value of the estate is the difference between the overall value at the date of opening, of course, inheritance of the assets and rights to make up to the assets, and the overall amount of the liabilities and deductible charges, like a loan, like a mortgage. The asset then can make up to the estate, for example, all the real estate and real estate rights, companies, ships, aircraft, stocks, bonds, private and public, other securities, company shares, annuities, pensions, credits, other assets such as money, gold, furniture, and so on. So there are some liabilities, as you can see, deductible from inheritance tax, such as the debits, for example, for the deceased existing to the date of opening the will, medical and funeral expenses, or any taxes paid to a foreign state related to the same inheritance. The mortgage and the land registry tax is due in the fixed amount of 200 euros for each one of them, regardless to the value of the property included inheritance, when the beneficiary has has or has not the beneficio prima casa, so taken into account. When any estate assets, including real estate or real estate rights, are happening in the game, it's always mandatory to submit an inheritance tax return. It's necessary to fill out the right tax form to Adencia, otherwise the declaration will be considered vacant, will be considered void. If that happens, there's no way you will become the beneficiary of those assets. If the deceased was non-resident in Italy, once again, if the deceased was not resident in Italy, the declaration must be sent to the office of the last Italian tax residency. And if the deceased was resident abroad, listen carefully, the inheritance tax is due only for and to the assets and rights transferred and existing in the Italian territory on the Italian soil at the time of the opening of the will. So therefore, assets and rights existing abroad do not need to be indicated in the dichiarazione di successione.